Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Retrospect. We've got a little change of pace for today. It's been a while since we've reposted an episode like this, but Jason is on vacation, and we had planned to get a couple episodes underneath us and get ahead on track and all that before he left, but with some scheduling conflicts, it pushed that recording date back, and then Stoney had a fall, and it put him out for a while he was resting. But don't worry, though. He has informed me that he's doing well, and it's nothing too serious. He's just sore right now. And you better believe that when he gets back into the studio that I'm going to give him a hard time for it. But all jokes aside, because of all those things that happened, the date that we had planned wasn't able to happen before Jason had to go on his trip, and so here we are. So with all that being said, they had requested that I repost one of our episodes from our backlog while we recuperate and come back stronger together. And so I chose to recap our episode of the book, The Fourth Turning, which was a great book, and it was a fun episode for all of us. And lastly, I want to say thanks for understanding. We appreciate you tuning in every week. And now, on with the episode. Welcome to the Retrospect Podcast, a show where people come together from different walks of life and discuss a topic from their generation's perspective. My name is Ian, and as always, I'm joined by Stoney.
Hello.
And Jason.
Hello, everyone.
How's it going?
It's been good. I was out of town this weekend and with the girlfriend, and we got to go tailgate a little bit and did some work in her yard. And but it was a great weekend. Weather's been great. I mean, it's dry out there right now.
Oh, yeah.
I think we're fixing to have at the time of this recording, I think we're fixing to have a little cold front come through, and some temps are going to be dropping. So
I'm excited.
So yeah, so it's been dry, but it's been comfortable outside.
I think Saturday I had 3, maybe 4 heart attacks.
Like real ones? Or
What?
Watching the LSU football game.
I was about to say. I was about
Go
to say.
Tigers!
Yeah.
I was able.
Wow.
I drove out. I never am ever really involved in sports, really, or football. Even though we're in a state that loves their football, loves LSU football specifically, and I was able to go out to the stadium. I wasn't in the stadium, but I was performing some music at like a local venue around the area, and I'm, again, not a big fan. Sports just not really my thing, but to each their own. And even I was watching the tail end of that game going, I don't know what's going to happen. And then, of course, and then obviously, it was a pretty sizable crowd around where we were at. And then when that final call was made and the final touchdown got, it got approved, or however you want to call it, got scored, man, that crowd went wild. And then, of course, I could see the stadium from where we were, so just like the traffic starts getting crazy, and the crowd is now excited, and there's even more people around, and it was a fun night. I had to be up early the next morning, which is a little unfortunate because I didn't get out of there till super late because of traffic and, of course, the event itself I was performing at. So, but it was fun. But
I thought that we were going to have a replay of a game October the 8th in 1988 when LSU played Auburn and beat them.
Yes.
This is with a crowd of 79,000 people. Now, that means there's 30,000 more people in the stands today.
Right.
But back then, it's called the earthquake game. The last play of the game, they won, and the crowd was so loud that they appeared on the Richter scales across South Louisiana, I guess.
Yeah.
And it's called the earthquake game. And I wondered if that happened again, but I guess the crowd was so tired at this time because it was the crowd that won that game Saturday night.
Oh, yes. That game went over
and
4 hours, which is a long time for a football game.
The defensive player weeks. Him and the crowd won that game.
Yeah, definitely the crowd did their part.
Yes.
I mean, if there was a 12th man,
There you go.
it was definitely Texas A&M has
yeah.
prided themselves on the 12th man.
right.
But I would think we had our own 12th man that really came out of retirement last night, or Saturday night, I should say. And but yeah, exciting. I mean, that's great for Coach Brian Kelly for the program and moving forward. So, we'll see what they do next week. They got Arkansas. I had Arkansas, so they're gonna have to keep themselves.
Yep.
Yeah.
Keep themselves grounded.
So around here in the state of Louisiana, it's been a little hectic, but
Well, it was homecoming for LSU, which was always busy for the city.
Yeah.
And also, like you said before, the weather that night was not awful.
No,
it was
nice.
So it was really nice.
Really nice.
So like that also I think fed into a lot of that as well, especially the event that I was, playing music at. Again, everyone was already kind of out there having fun and hanging out, which was really nice.
Yeah.
And then whenever everything succeeded at the end, you can imagine everyone came out in droves, and that crowd easily tripled. And so I was like, oh man.
One of the fun things about living in South Louisiana, when LSU wins, people spend money. Restaurants do better.
Yeah.
Shops do better. Everybody does better. If LSU loses, people don't spend money. It's interesting how that's happened over the last many years.
They did an economic impact study on when LSU is doing well and how that translates into economic, an economic boon for the city of Baton Rouge or not.
Yeah.
And I remember this has been a few years now, but I think at the time it's about a $30 million impact to the city of Baton Rouge when LSU is doing well, and what restaurants are pulling in, what bars are pulling in, just all the kind of things that are attached to a winning program, and the excitement that goes along with it. So,
like I was saying, the venue I was at, again, there was a cover, I think, for getting in the place. It was like a special place they had, like a outside thing. And like I said, that crowd grew exponentially. So I can only imagine what it would have looked like if they lost.
Yeah, I think they also had the new light bands that was kind of new.
Yes.
Oh yeah,
that was neat. I was kind of watching that on TV, and I was like, wow, that looks pretty cool. It looks like it had a good effect.
Yeah.
So that's something new. But 100 years of Tiger Stadium.
There you go.
Of Tiger Stadium. So that was the 100th year anniversary.
But that money and the partying aspect is key, because like the LSU baseball team, Omaha loves LSU to be in the championship in
That's
Omaha.
because we buy a lot of liquor.
Buy a lot of liquor, spend a lot of money on food. They have bars there that have LSU memorabilia all in the bars there because they love LSU so much.
Well, South Louisiana in particular has a very unique culture here that really makes us different from a lot of places around the United States. For many, for listeners that are not from here, and you have to be down here to really experience it. You can't read about it. You can't watch it on television. There is a certain feel, and there is a very festive atmosphere to everything that we do. Right. It's why food and booze and is all integrated into the life culture of this area, and of course that comes with good and bad.
Well, it's funny, say that even goes into the bad. There, our funerals can be a little bit different.
Right.
There's bands that play, and you go down the street. But even as bad as these hurricanes are, we have hurricane parties.
Right.
We even have a drink named after a hurricane.
Right.
Because we'd rather sit there and drink and party and eat and watch it happen than worry about it.
Yeah, well, it's definitely when we travel and go to other places that are very homogenous, I guess, in the best way I can describe their culture. It's not that other places don't have their own unique festivals and in music and stuff like that, but there are a lot of places that are just, they don't. It's just kind of a very bland type of way of living, and that's fine for
them,
for most people. But most people live that way. But that's neither here nor there. But yes, it was a great weekend.
Lots of fun was had.
A lot of fun, and so we're starting a new week, and we have a very interesting topic.
Yes,
that we're going to talk about.
If I remember correctly, I think you, Jason, were the one that had requested that we read this book that we're talking about.
Right?
Today.
Yes. I was watching another podcast, and the host interviewed the author, or one of the authors of this book, because it's my understanding that the other one is now deceased.
Yes, William Strauss passed in 2007.
So I think it's Howe. Neil Howe.
Yes, Neil Howe.
And he's a demographer. And so he really looks at how, we move as a culture and how things are built up and then torn down and then rebuilt again from a generational perspective. So our topic today is a book called The Fourth Turning. And I think our listeners will get a lot out of this because it does speak to us today.
Yeah, there's a couple of chapters in where I was like, okay, I understand we're like kind of laying the groundwork for what the kind of premise of this book is. I think it was like chapter 4. Again, it was like a few chapters in where like he starts to talk about because the one thing I had to wrap my head around was that this is also written in the perspective. This was written in 1997,
right?
So reading this now in 2024, like I was a bit kind of confused by some of the. Like how he was talking about the future and like the early 2000s hadn't happened yet. And I was like, I got to readjust my frame of
your
reference.
Perspective.
So then, like I said, once we get like into those first few chapters in, he then starts to talk about like how there's going to be something that goes wrong in the early 2000s that won't get resolved until, 20, 30 years later. And like starts to like really hit the nail on the head with like there's going to be something happening in like 2005, and I've always talked about things felt different after like 2008.
Yeah,
with like cell phones, with the recession and all that stuff happening, and or again generally in that range like 2006 to 2008. I was also my early teenage years, which I think was like very fundamental for me.
It's your formative years. You're absorbing your culture at that time.
I think a lot of like music culture, I think really impacted me in that like early 2000s. A lot of like rock music, a lot of bands that were around there. So a lot of my tastes were I think formed in that time. A lot of video games as a kid came out around that time that I think are very nostalgic for me. It's like that just is like such a pivotal time, but I felt some sort of like shift at that point. Like again, cell phones or I say cell phones. I had a cell phone, but like smartphones. The first iPhone came out, I think, around that time, and then like the shift started to happen. Where like now, we're almost 20 years removed from all that, and it feels like we're in a different.
One of the big things about this book is this is a generational show.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
And that is exactly what this book is about.
Yep.
Generations.
You're right.
And that the best predictor of the future is the past. And one of the things I got, right off the bat, and they talk about it in the book, and it before I got to that point in the book, I have a saying that I've said many times on this show, and I truly believe this, and this book it just screams this. Hard times create strong men. Strong men create easy times. Easy times create weak men, and weak men create hard times. We are in that weak men era right now, and this book talks about it extensively.
Yeah. Neil Howe has been on a number of podcasts that I've been now that I've kind of tuned into this, I've really have picked up a lot of different, podcast shows that he's been on. I'd love to get him on our show.
Oh yeah.
But he does, present a model, in essence, of how things are built up and then are reformed and then renewed again. But just to kind of back up a little bit, kind of the premise of the book, that there is basically history is broken down into saeculums, okay? And what that means is that's just a Latin term for basically means an age. It's approximately this the span of a human life, anywhere from about 80 to 100 years, and then the definition I found it's a length of time roughly equal to the potential lifetime of a person, or equivalently the complete renewal of a human population made up of approximately 80 to 100 years. And it's termed in a kind of official sense the Strauss Howe generational theory.
Okay.
That's how they define this. So within that 100-year period, they break it up into about 20-year periods. They call them turnings.
Right.
We would call that maybe a generation.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's 4 kind of periods of time within, say, a century that different things are happening. And the first season, they call it the high.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In our own American experience, we would say that began at the end of World War II.
Right.
So let's think about what the United States was at that point in time. We had total victory, economic prosperity, okay? Institutions are strong. Individuality is not emphasized. Conformity, strength, stability. Many people like to hearken back to kind of a golden age of America, and they'll often think about that. Matter of fact, if you kind of want to tie into it, just looking at the political talk today.
Oh yeah.
With Trump voters and the MAGA movement, what do they often hearken back to? They hearken back to this golden age of when prosperity was everywhere.
Yeah.
I mean, you could work at a gas station and still afford a home.
Right.
So it was a totally different time.
But what had they just come out of also? Not just the war, but what had they just come out of? They had just come out of the Depression, which would have been the crisis.
Crisis of the
Okay, that would have been that generational crisis turning, because where did that come from? The Roaring '20s,
right?
When deviance and alcohol and all of this major catastrophe stuff, the Depression, all of these things were happening, which created the strong men again.
Right. Yeah.
And so now we're kind of going back to this cycle of
we're kind of in a mess right now.
We're in a mess right now.
That's what I'm saying. So, we just to kind of break it down for our listeners.
Can I throw this out there right quick,
Go
Jason?
ahead.
This wasn't their first book.
No, it was.
This was their second book. And their first one was, and I love this, Generations: The History of America's Future.
Right.
1584 to 2069. That was the title. They wrote that one in 91.
Oh yeah, the book goes back.
But the history of America's future.
Right, exactly. Of how you can break this down. I mean, we're using America because that's kind of more what's relevant to us in where we're at right now in history. But this high age, this exciting time that people feel that America is great. There's tons of patriotism at this time. They believe institutions are can accomplish great things. Think of like the great construction project, the interstates.
Right.
That all that was envisioned, that we're going to build these massive roads across the United States. That never existed before.
Right.
That period of time. It just didn't. But you have this renewed sense. People are like, oh, we can do great things. Collectivism. Believe it or not, the boomers are very big in the collective. We, as a group, we can do great things together.
Right.
We can
And
put somebody on the moon.
We can put somebody on the
can do
moon.
so
All
many
this
different
is
things.
part
Yep.
of this kind of greater, grandiose mission of changing the world, so to speak.
I've said that about it just feels like looking back at people from that generation or that time period, and it just feels like there's so much optimism for the future.
Oh yeah,
Like which like I like talking about in like modern perspectives. Like I feel like I could be wrong. It may just be the circles I'm a part of, but like I feel like I don't hear a lot of people like talking positively of the future. There's no optimism for the future. It's just like the world's going to hell.
that's
because that's
right,
what we're in the
that's
crisis
I know,
right
I know.
now.
Where
That's-
we're at.
I got it. But
we're-
I'm talking about like you disconnect from all that. I'm just like talking about real people, like having real conversations. Like I look back in time, and like again, even I went to Walt Disney World 8 or 9 months ago, and like I love going to certain parts of like Tomorrowland, because again it's like from this like perspective of like the 1950s, 60s, 70s of like what the future is going to look like, and there's so much optimism, there's so much big kind of almost outlandish ideas, but like they believe that they can make it happen,
right.
and it's like it kind of encourages me in a way, because I'm like, why don't we have that sort of optimism anymore? And I think obviously we're getting into that right now, but it's just
Right.
I've had this kind of inner dialogue.
You're not the only one. You're not the only one who thinks that way. I mean, so, and that, based on what I've read, that period of our country ended with the assassination of JFK, and there was a fundamental shift. That something happened to the psyche of America after his assassination.
Yeah.
Because what then comes after now? So we're now getting into 1964, 1965. Lyndon Johnson is now the president. Vietnam is ramping up.
Oh yeah! Wow, you're not.
So
kidding.
now you have a different. We have a what they call the awakening.
Yes.
This period ran from about 1964 to, I would venture to say, they kind of put it somewhere with the election of Ronald Reagan in '84. So you have this period of time called the awakening, and what's happening now is people now are pushing back against conformity. I don't want to conform. What about my own inner, what I want to do?
Yeah.
My own individual kind of way of approaching life. And I don't believe that I think these institutions are too big.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, I don't even trust them.
I was going to say,
what was the saying in Vietnam? Don't trust anybody over 30.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, or even like just the idea. I mean, I know it's probably bigger now, but I can only imagine, like, again, people having suspicions of who actually killed JFK, and who was all behind
Back
that.
then, they didn't.
I
They
know, but
just
still.
knew it was one guy. It wasn't till later times
Right.
that the conspiracy theory stuff. Back then, you just knew it was one guy, and that was it.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Nobody really kind of dived into it. But what's happening is you start to see now the children that are coming up, what are they doing? They're basically saying, screw you, mom and dad.
Yeah.
I'm going to go do what I want to do. I mean, you look at pictures of Woodstock, and you could imagine how horrible that may have, how their parents would have looked at their kids doing that. A perfect example of I read an article a while back was Jim Morrison. Jim Morrison kind of rebelled against his father was a military man. And you look at a picture of his father and you look at a picture of Jim Morrison of how he just completely rejected the rigid, conform, do your duty to society. There's a casting off at this period of time of, I don't want to be responsible for society. I just kind of want to feel me.
Yeah.
I just kind of want to kind of float in the ether, so to speak.
Right.
You have this kind of awareness of inequalities. Guess what's happening at this time?
Oh, yeah.
Civil rights, women's rights. abortion,
Yeah.
LGBT, I mean, all the the homosexual, all these groups that had been marginalized. Guess what? Now there's this awareness of, oh, we got to do something about this. I mean, we can't allow this. Whereas the parents at this time, they're not worried about that. We're like, no, the country is good. The institutions we need to keep doing what we're doing because that's our duty to do this. So you have the children now are rejecting these norms of society. So you can look at, say, all the institutions start taking a major hit. Matter of fact, this will tie into a topic we're going to talk about next week on the decline in religion.
Right.
You see reductions in trust in institutional religion.
Well, that's what the unraveling is. That is the individualism rises, the narcissistic, self-godly, I am more important than everybody else.
Right.
And that creates the weak people, which creates going into the crisis.
Right.
And so that's we're right at the end of the unraveling. The third, I think we're somewhere toward the end or the beginning of the crisis coming up.
Well, yeah, the third season and this period of time, they call it the unraveling. It started in 1984 and ended with the financial collapse of 2008.
Right.
It did, and so what's but let's look about this. What's going on now between this 1984 and 2008 period? Mm-hmm. The Berlin Wall comes down.
Oh yeah,
right.
Wow.
Communism.
You're not even, yeah, that's
communism falls. You've got music starts taking a different form. The rise of gangster rap starts coming about. Cities now start to implode a little bit. The music culture, the urban culture changes. The music starts reflecting an anger, an angst in society. Now it's all full-blown, all about me. Institutions now are de-emphasized. I don't need institutions, okay, at this time at all. Distrust of institutions. Deregulation. Also another... You heard of in politics, we need to deregulate. We need to deregulate. This idea that I don't need all this stuff. This is holding me back.
Right. Mm-hmm.
The problem is it also leads to massive income inequality, which ultimately then brings us to the fourth turning, which they call crisis. And that started with 2008, and they said 2028, 2030. We're approaching an election.
Oh, yeah.
2024. What's going to happen in 2028? That's, to me, I'm more looking at that. Then I'm looking.
But remember, we also talked about in one of our last episodes, 2027 being a critical turning point in some other stuff.
I mean, when did Barack Obama get elected?
2008, or I believe.
Was it 8?
I think it was 8,
or
it was
it
sometime
12?
Around. No, I think it was 8. Hold on, let's see. I remember that because that was, again, it was another big point in history.
And what did he say?
Well,
what did he say as part of his campaign speech?
I don't remember. Let me see.
If it
Obama, a Democrat from LA, took office following his victory over the Republican nominee John McCain in 2008 presidential election. 4 years later, in 2012 presidential election.
So
again.
what did he say? He says, "I'm going to fundamentally transform America."
Well,
I find it funny that he was the catalyst of now we are in this full-blown crisis because individualism, if gone to its logical conclusion, society can't maintain that.
But if you needed a poster child for the weak men era, there's your poster child for a weak man right there.
Well, let's look at this. Look, why do we have weak men today? The question then goes back to, I would venture to say, the Generation X generation, which would be mine. Those are the parents that raised these children that are now or what would be what you're talking about, weak men. Part of that stems from a degree. I mean, think about what's all the things that happened. I mean, as a kid growing up, I mean, we threw fireworks at each other. We threw bottle whoops. We had BB gun wars. We shot each other with BB guns. We had lawn darts. You know, there was no seatbelt laws. Mm-hmm. How many times I just was crawling around in the back seat of my mother's car? Mm-hmm. So what happens is there's an overreaction that, we've got to protect children. So guess what's happening? You start getting a push on MAD gets really moving at this time. Got to stop DWIs. We gotta make sure kids are in car seats. Now that's a huge industry now. You know, there is this kind of a protective shell that we created around this young generation at the time, and we all knew what was going to happen to them as they got to adults. They were going to be very protected. They were going to be very risk adverse. They're not going to want to take chances. Unfortunately, that has consequences because what happens is that's how things move. Take chances. It may be bad, but I'm going to still take the chance. Right. And so society gets stagnated. It starts devolving, so to speak. And so what we have right now, many people say we are in the fourth turning. We are in crisis mode. What do we have? We have civic upheaval.
Oh, yeah.
That's evident with the Trump election coming up and just how politically divided we are today. Skyrocketing debt. Our national debt is astronomical. I don't even know what, just servicing the debt, how much that takes out of our budget each and every year. COVID-19.
Yep.
Think of all the things that happened with COVID. How many people were willing to just give up their rights because they got scared?
Yeah.
I mean, we did. Everybody's
but
wearing
see, that
masks.
puts you in a crisis thing. Ronald Reagan said it best. We're one generation. Again, we're coming back to the generations. One generation away from losing all of our rights. Ronald Reagan said that.
Yeah,
and I mean, it's like he was a prophet.
We are now. The funny thing about this is it's just. I mean, you can back this up. This has been going on for a long time, these generational cycles of history. And that's really the premise of the book, that history does repeat itself.
Right.
It doesn't necessarily, there's nothing new that really happens. Mm-hmm. It does follow kind of some basic rules. Because, I mean, think about of what was going on. What was about 83 years before World War II? What crisis did this country face?
The Civil War.
The Civil War.
Right.
The Civil War. So you could think of the generations leading up to the Civil War. You know, how that generation that fought the Civil War versus what their kids viewed the Civil War as.
Think about that. Okay, that was the crisis. Then what comes out of that? That comes the strong men. That comes people rebuilding. That comes people doing stuff. Then you get the indulged itself people, and then you wind up with the depression. And so how quickly does that cycle just continue on and on and on?
Well, right, exactly. In 83 years or so before the Civil War, what was the big war? It was the Revolutionary War.
So how many years has it been since the Civil War and the last crisis? How many years has it been since?
Well, that's what I'm saying. They say it's about, seemed like about 60
to 80 years.
85
years. What is the previous one? Is it World War II that we would reference in this point?
Correct. So It was about 83 years, if I remember the dating, I think from between the end of the Civil War to the beginning of World War II.
And then World War II.
Yeah, now we're 80, so we're getting to that point.
But it was. But think about this. That was 45 to 80. So maybe not a full 80 years because we're in the middle of the crisis right now. But this crisis started in 2008, 2010. So
say
60 to 70 years, but it's still it's.
And I think that I think it's also interesting that it's not, we're not talking about specific like specific dates here. Like in the book specifically, he's like, something's going to happen around 2005.
Right.
And the fact that we're all talking about something happening in 2008 is close enough for me.
Close enough,
close
right?
enough for me
to kind of get your attention.
Right. So if we're talking about, like you're saying, I'm curious about what's going to happen in 2028. I'm curious what's going to happen in 2025, potentially, or 26. Again, because if we're talking about anywhere in the range of right now in 2024 and 2028, something happening, that's a close enough window for me that I'm bought in. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
within a handful of years, that could. Really,
it's
because right now I feel like we're on the cusp of world-shattering
something happening.
Yeah.
Now, venture to say that is generally war. So the question is what is going to, in essence, collapse everything, and then a rebuilding, and then basically to another high era. And I would, the premise of the author of this is not that he's pushing that this is not an apocalyptic type. This is in essence necessary for society to evolve.
Yeah.
Right.
Because we've got to clean out all the old and start over. It's sort of like fires in a forest.
And that's what I was interested in reading this book, because that's. Again, I feel like I have had this concept or idea that I've thought about, but never fully flushed it out or put words to it. So for me, like I have thought before, especially in the context of American history or in America in general, because that's the context I was born and raised in, is. In the book, he talks about the fact that other civilizations in history viewed time differently,
right?
And how America is a very linear,
very
path.
linear.
And I was like, that makes so much sense, because I was the concept that I was thinking of that I had never really fully flushed out or put on paper or whatever. I was like, I find it interesting that history, the old adage, history is doomed to repeat itself. I was like, because the younger generations don't listen to the older generations or don't look back at history like they should, which I think is very much a American-centric probably view on some things. But I'm sitting here thinking about all this, man, I don't know. The world, I think, is going in a very crazy direction. It's interesting to see that looking back in history now and having some dates for some things and connecting some dots is making concrete what I feel like is kind of this hypothetical thing I thought of.
What do you hear now being talked about that wasn't never even talked about 10 years ago? They never even on surveys and stuff, this question was never asked. But in the last 10 years, a very sizable portion of the population believes it will happen.
Civil War?
There it is.
Yeah.
Oh, wow, you're not wrong.
Yeah.
How many people are talking about
the potential
of a civil war?
Yeah.
How close we are to this, because we have become so polarized in our politics now. And the problem is generally what happens when these things happen, there's always a winner and then there's a loser. I hearken back to the Civil War era.
Yeah.
When with the defeat, when the Southern states, the Confederacy was defeated, it was 2 generations of Southern people that were pariahs.
Mm-hmm.
They were pariahs. What's the former president? Truman.
Okay.
Truman talked about how the South could not stand there was still a lot of hatred
Yeah.
toward the Yankee at that time. People don't think about that today because we think, oh, we're all Americans and we're this and we're that and all that.
Right.
But there was literally 2 generations of Southerners that were pariahs
Yeah.
to the rest of the United States.
That's crazy to think about.
And then vice versa of how Southerners perceived themselves and how they viewed their place in society, because they had lost everything. They had lost their homes. The economics completely got destroyed
Right.
in the South. And so what values won? Was the Yankee value won.
Right.
And they said, no, you will do this.
Yeah.
You will do this. You will live like this. You can't live the way you used to live anymore. So these things, like we're in crisis now, someone's going to lose.
Oh, yeah.
Someone will lose. And the winner generally is strong, and everybody falls in line.
Yep. Yep.
They do. The
That
question
is
is
how
right
history-
now where we're at.
Who's the strongest?
We have two competing camps.
Yep.
We do. And I've always said this. It is our fundamental view of the world. That is what the fight is.
Mm-hmm.
If you really distill it, take away all the kind of the BS,
Yeah.
and really get down to where we're at with this, it's fundamentally of how I view the world. That is the 2 big fights. There's a group that's probably more collective in its approach. They want strong institutions. They want government to take care of them. They want government to be able to do things. And you hear that in a lot of where the Democratic Party is right now. You talk to a Republican side, what's the deal? I don't want all that government.
Right.
I'm a more individualistic view of the world. I don't want government to take care of me. I want to take care of me. And there's good and bad in both of those,
Yeah.
in both of those positions. But at its core, that is the fight.
Right.
It just is. And so the question is, what side's going to win out? If Kamala Harris gets elected and they, in essence, fundamentally transform America, the other side is going to be much like the South was at the end of the Civil War, where on that side of the river, they're them and we're over here and we're hated.
Right.
You are. That's what's going to happen. And the question is where that's going to line up for us now. That's the big unknown. Will it devolve into a civil war?
Well, that's.
I mean, will that happen? We don't know.
What the crisis is. The 4th turning is marked by economic distress. Okay, we're there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we can't afford to live right now. We just can't. Political polarization. We can't be more polarized right now.
Oh, yeah.
Period. And then global instability. What's happening in the Middle East? What's happening all around the world right now? And so this period is likely going to end in a couple of ways. War, revolution, or some type of significant upheaval that's going to drive these factions to fight. Somehow they're going to fight. But out of this, if you look at all of the other things, something happens. A new high arises out of this conflict. And I'll say conflict because we don't know what type of a conflict it is, so I'll just generically use that word.
Right.
Something's happening, and we know this. If you go by the book, if you go by the what was it that I said last week or the week before, the prophecy of the popes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
27 is the year. 2027 is the year according to the Vatican and the popes, and that fits right into line of this. Now, yes, we're not talking about days or weeks, but we're talking about, like Ian said here, it's close enough.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Again, for me, I having worked in the inventory business, there's a such thing as variance where you're allowed a certain percentage, and I feel like if we're shooting for 2028 and we hit between 25 and 28, I'm like, hey, that's enough variance that I'm like that's close enough for me. Yeah, and especially like you're talking about, like, again, like looking back at history, we see the assassination of JFK, which then like kind of sparks this. It changed. Right, or even like I said before.
What was a song that came out that really, I think, kind of, where kind of really it really, I think, kind of goes with this second period, this awakening period. What was it? That song with American Pie. Mm-hmm. I mean, it talks about a lot of the kind of the America's lost innocence, and that's what the JFK assassination was. It was like
bye bye.
I mean, it's like we've now moved into a different period of time, and it's like nobody ever thought a president get assassinated. Mm. Why? What's going on? And then, of course, that leads to all the issues of Lyndon Johnson and his problems, and then Richard Nixon and his resignation from the presidency and all that. It was just, you have a degradation of the things that make us great, that we lose faith in. And we have utterly lost faith in all institutions now, because that's the why we're in the mess we're in right now, is because we really have nowhere to turn. That's why everybody's turning to themselves.
To ourselves.
And the problem is that in it itself is a problem.
Right.
Because you can't maintain that forever. Eventually, you either disintegrate into tribes, which we have, and that produces weakness. It just does.
According to this book and other things, you can't do either one and sustain it. You can't be, I'm a person, I'm going to do it by myself, or be over-regulated by the government. That's going to look what happened to the Roman Empire. I mean, you keep going back to the Civil War. Go back a little bit further. This is exactly what happened to the Roman Empire.
Well, look, I would venture to say, let's go back to the Revolutionary War.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Let's go back to the Revolution. You had people that came over here wanting, and eventually things happened, which led to the colonies basically saying, I've had enough of England. I feel like we can run our own show. But there was a lot of fights within that. There were a lot of loyalists in the colonies that supported the British. Right. They had no interest in being independent from Britain.
Don't shake up my way of life.
Exactly.
Don't mess with my money, basically, is what they were saying. Don't mess with my money.
And then you have that. What's funny is the children of those people that fought the revolution. You look at, they call that the Gilded Age.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And they're looking back going, why did you even do this? I mean, life would have been so much easier just stayed in England. Why are we?
Because strong men create easy times, and easy times create weak men. So those children were
I don't mean to bring this like super biblical, but like I've been part of like a study recently, or a few things talking about like how whenever like Moses brought the tribes out of Israel, or brought out of Egypt,
right?
And the whole discussion kind of feels the same way of like having to. I'm not saying this is the cause or what was needed, though some of those people weren't going to inherit the promised land.
Well, if you read, if you want to read into that, you can basically say, why did they wander around for 40 years in the desert?
And that's what I'm saying.
To get rid of.
And so, and then
in the same time, you could have walked across it in 7 days.
And there's a lot of scriptures are talking about the fact of like people having that same sentiment of like, why did we ever shake up our way of life? We could have just stayed slaves in Egypt. We could have just done things.
We had our food.
We had our food. And of course, like that's not, there's something better out here.
Right.
And it's like, oh, that's hard to put in context reading this book. And again, just thinking about how, again, like we're saying, how people, it obviously for me, without getting into all probably the scientific aspect or the numbers of it all or the semantics or whatever you want to call it, it feels logical for me to think that like
That there's a cycle to everything?
That there's a cycle, especially when it comes to like, I know how human beings are. I know how I am. We get comfortable. We get stuck in our routine.
Yes.
We do things a certain way, and then we grow old, and then sometimes the people underneath us want things to be different, and then
you get displaced.
It makes sense for me, especially,
Right.
again, like I said, I've turned 30 this year. You know, I looked back at pictures from, again, this book specifically, and thinking about the past. I started looking back 10 years ago when I was like freshly 20, and was like, I was thinking about this as I was like reading this book a little bit. I was like, what did 2014 feel like to me? Because I was 20 in 2014. In 2015, I was 21, and I was like, I'm experiencing the world in a different way. I was like, what did it feel like? And then I started looking back at old pictures I posted on social media, just like kind of like reliving those memories for a second. And I was like, man, the world feels. And I know everyone would probably say this, but I was like, the world feels really different.
So that's what I'm saying.
In a different way.
If you don't mind me asking, how old are your mother and your about? Because I'm trying to make a point here.
I don't know their exact age, but about 50s.
Okay, so they're they're Generation X.
Yeah. If I'm not mistaken, I think my dad is a couple years older than my mom, and yeah.
That's your Generation X.
If I'm not mistaken, I don't think
they're like my age.
I don't think my dad's.
I'm 55 years old.
Right.
So
I don't think my dad's hit 60 yet.
Okay, so he's that old Generation X.
Yeah.
You know, what was the common theme with Generation X? I mean, we were the thrown away generation. We were. You know, we were the ones.
It's crazy to think for me. My mom was born just before the moon landing.
Exactly. I was born in '69.
Right. There you go.
So I mean, that's what I'm saying. The Generation X, they call it the throwaway generation, because it was a generation that basically they grew up in a time where the boomer generation that had that were, you know, the ones that kind of came out of post World War II.
Yeah.
You know, they were trying to, you know, they didn't want to deal with Generation X. It was sort of like it was kind of like I'm trying to not, you know, you have birth control coming about. I don't even want to have kids. So the Generation X is, you know, mama had to go to work. They came home, the latchkey generation.
Well, the TV babysitter generation, really, when you bring it down to it, y'all were the first, hey, go sit in front of the TV.
So what happened was they saw a world that they were very vulnerable, and they raised their kids with the idea that I'm trying to protect you from that because of what I went through. I know what it was.
But it was a different protection than it is now, okay? I'm 64. I'm the last year of the boomers, so I'm really kind of raised in the Gen X. Okay, we drank from hoses.
Yep.
We didn't have warning labels.
Right.
Okay, I remember traveling, laying on the back dash of the car. Not in the car seat, and the brakes coming, and I'm going flying into the front seat.
Right.
Okay. So it was a different kind of protection. Now we're so self-indulgent, and we want to protect we don't want them to get involved in anything.
Well, and they are, and some of the latter Generation X basically raised the kids that are now Generation Z.
Right.
And so, but there was still it started off, Stoney, you were talking about being early like that, but it morphed as time went on.
Yes.
And it became more and more protected. So you are a product of a certain protection that your parents wanted to give you because of the way they were raised.
Right. I grew up in a time where like you could still like ride your bike around the neighborhood, and then like you weren't supposed to come home until lights came on. Like, and that was that was an open thing, but like people in like my brother's generation, like my youngest brother and so on, were like, you're not even allowed to like leave the driveway.
But think about this. How fast did that go from that to where now kids don't even leave their room?
Right.
They're stuck on the TV, the Wi-Fi, the phones and everything else. They don't even go outside anymore.
Right. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. But that protection that didn't necessarily exist before had an impact on how you view the world.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, by the time you were of age, in essence, about 20,
right?
That's kind of how the book really kind of...
Between 18 and 21, it feels
exactly.
about right. Yeah.
So, I mean, you're seeing the world differently than your parents did, the way I did.
Yeah.
Same with Stoney, and basically you could back up the way his parents viewed the world.
Well, again, like I was saying before, things in 2008, I would have been 14. I was 14 in 2008. So again, like talk about like that was a very malleable point in my life. And then again, like when I said look back at pictures from 2014, I was 20. And so like, and I was just thinking about how I graduated high school. I had my like first real job that I was working. It was like, you know, doing a bunch of fun like music things as well. And it's like, you know, just looking at and also just kind of being involved because again at that point Barack Obama had gotten reelected for the second term, and he was probably halfway through that, and just how different the world felt. Because again, I was a child during 9/11, and then the whole what is it called? There's like a term for the kind of the battles that we fought out in Iraq.
How about
action?
There's like a term for it where it's like I can't remember the name of it. It's like
Operation Enduring Freedom.
Maybe there's like a term that people that I think the
War on Terror.
Yes, that
I mean, that was the big thing after the
Twin
Towers were hit and the
people,
other events.
There's people that were like older than myself, like my friends' older brothers that like went off to go fight in Iraq, and that's what they the term they use is the War on Terror. So I remember that again as like the quote unquote younger brother to like people that were off in that thing, and then so to be in this like new world where like that was kind of a distant memory. So
I kind of wonder now if you know, we've looked back, we've kind of gone back to the Egyptians, we've kind of gone back to the Roman Empire. That was kind of very area oriented.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
Now we're in a situation now where you know we're talking about America, or we're talking about Russia and things like this. What happens if America goes into civil war in today's society? That doesn't just affect America. That now affects the world.
Well, you know,
because now you got China wanting to take us over. You got Russia wanting to do something.
Well, I mean, it could really go either way. I mean, if you kind of follow the premise of the book, that there has to be eventually a forest fire.
Yes. Well, what I'm saying is that forest fire before was kind of very area oriented,
right?
You know, contained. Great word there. Now, now this is a little bit bigger.
Right.
Yeah. It's almost like the what was the show we did a long time ago? About the big cycle, the universe. I know what you're talking about. Now you're rubbing off on here's
me.
My
the great filter.
The great filter. We at a great filter event with this the turning.
Well,
you know?
I mean, I guess you would have to view what would a new world look like on the other end of this? What would your life look like? What would institutions look like? How would we operate in a new, because based upon the model, this is necessary for this to happen, and we come out better on the other end.
Right.
So so you have to ask is, you know, what side wins? I mean, really, the question is are we going to be, if you're on the conservative side and kind of the more libertarian type view of life, if you lose and then institutions become strong again and values are imposed upon you that are not yours, you're going to have to live it.
Or die.
Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, it's
right.
not,
or
but
go
that's
somewhere
what I'm
else.
saying. That's what I'm saying. I think that a perfect example because it's still relevant, is how Southerners saw themselves after the Civil War. Those veterans that fought in the Confederate Army, that came home to ruined houses and farms that were gone and a way of life that no longer existed. How do they view themselves? How do I put myself in this? The next thing that happens, whether the conservative side loses and a more progressive world emerges in the next high.
Yeah. And I think that's this is where like the nuance of, I think that there will still be rebellions. I think there will still be insurrections and pushback. But that doesn't change the fact that they're like, this is the established new normal. There is friction. There is because I can imagine again, after the Civil War, you think things were peaceful directly after?
No, they were not peaceful.
No. Right. That's what I'm saying. So there is
there's a lot of hatred.
It's still in flux. But I think people still,
But eventually, whatever emerged out of the Civil War, our country eventually
became a world power. Became a world power.
But then what? Had economic collapse, and it led to World War.
But through that crisis, what did you have? You had the Industrial Revolution.
Right.
You had so many things come out of it that those hatreds and bigotries kind of. I don't want to say died out, but got overwhelmed by something else, a greater good, greater something in common to fight for.
Right, and I think also younger generations that maybe have, in that context, probably more quote unquote progressive views for that time period came up and were like, you know what, maybe it's not all bad. Maybe this little area is not all bad. Maybe we can, maybe I'm okay living in this new post-Civil War society.
But then also the leaders that came out of that era were the old people, the J.D. Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, and everything else that then took advantage of that situation.
Right. That's what I'm saying. So the country emerged from that, grew as a world power. Eventually, it led to its own problems, which then led to the collapse. And then what else is going? You got World War I.
Yeah.
Right? Kind of people could forget about World War I a little bit because, everybody's focused on World War II.
The war to end all wars.
Right, exactly. So there's once again, there's an unraveling occurring, right? Yeah. Europe changed fundamentally after the Archduke Ferdinand was assassinated.
Right.
Which led to World War I. Old kingdoms that had been got wiped out. It was just a whole different world emerged.
But you see, that's kind of my point there. Back then, these things, the Civil War was kind of America's crisis.
Right.
But it can also be that 4 or 5 different turnings are happening at the same time, just at different levels across the globe. But now, what is all this on a world level? Because we're all big and we're all strong now.
Right.
What happens now? Well, you see, that could have been 2 different fourth turnings happening at the same time and converging kind of a little bit. But now if something happens in America and we hit this crisis, now what happens?
Well, you talked about somebody saying, well, it's not all bad, and we, so did y'all read about the archetypes?
Yes,
a little bit, yeah.
Like for example, in the high, what do you have? You have prophets.
Oh, yeah, right, yeah.
Those are the people that are coming out. I would venture to say that the emerging industrialists of that era, they were the prophets. The J.D. Rockefellers, the Carnegies, the Vanderbilts, we're moving,
building the new world.
Coming out of World War II, think of the business leaders that were, look at all these great things that
optimistic
we can
future,
do. Optimistic. Yeah. Then what follows that? Then you have a nomadic generation. You have nomadic. I would venture to say a good example of that is Elon Musk.
Right.
What does Generation X build? We build how to move things around. Right? Think about it.
Right.
That's because those are the influences that affected our generation growing up. We don't really have a place. We're here, but we're going to get things done, and we're going to get things moving around. Okay. And then when you have what follows.
Just for the record, boomers are the prophets of
Yes.
this current crisis. Just to let you know there. Y'all need to listen to me.
Right. Which I think is kind of funny, like, especially coming from like the old meme now, or the kind of the old joke of like, okay, boomer, because it feels very much like the young people, older generations, like trying to warn the younger generations of what's coming. And of course, the younger people being like, okay.
Well,
Just for the record, if we're in a situation where I'm the voice of reason, we're in a shitload of trouble.
well, I mean, and then what follows? What follows that? It's all of a sudden what they call during the unraveling. What emerges? It's the hero.
The hero.
Right. Of course.
That's the millennials.
Yeah.
That's the millennials. No, it is.
Well, yeah, I guess you're right.
It is. I mean, it is the millennials. It's they're you say, wait a minute, okay, we got to kind of get some. I'm here to save.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, think of.
I mean, a lot of activism, a lot of different change and stuff has been millennials.
It's millennials.
Yeah.
Right. So and then after that, you have the crisis period, and you have the artist generation.
But you also have to classify that into my statement before. That artist generation is also the weak people.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
Because they're not prepared for anything. They can't, if you look at it coming down, strong men, weak men,
right,
hard times,
where
easy
they
times.
where are they at in the cycle?
These artists, sorry, Ian.
Oh, no,
these are the weak people. These are the people that aren't going to be able to do very much in a crisis.
Right.
I mean, we are.
Well, I mean, what is it? Born during a crisis, which since what do we say, 2008, overprotected, age of sensitive, conformist young adults, and emerge as process-oriented leaders during an awakening.
Well, I mean,
I'm trying to think.
Think of you've been hearing the term woke.
Oh yeah,
and the amount of canceling you, and we can't offend anybody. We everybody's feelings got to be for I could tell you for the Generation X, I mean we didn't care about if we offended you or not. We didn't. I would even venture to say the boomers didn't care about.
We did even worse. Think about the comedy, like the Dean Martin roast.
But
you just said shit, whatever on the top of your head, and everybody laughed.
Think about it. That's what I'm saying. But that emerged within the millennial with this
because you're creating weak people. Okay. Oh, I hurt your feelings.
It's a
I'm so
there
sorry.
Is a coddling effect.
Oh, you poor baby.
The interesting thing is that I'm looking at right now is that kids, I say kids, I mean people that are younger than me, that were born in 2006 are turning 18 this year. So that means that 2005, 2004, like those are all kids that are like 19, 20, 2003 or whatever, or 21 years old now. So to think that, like, again, just like putting a frame of reference around, like, this whole like time period we're talking about, this whole like shift that I felt in 2006 to 2008. 2006, like right now, those kids are turning 18 years old.
Right.
And then moving forward, that's going to, obviously, like kids that were born at that time are now like adults and have like lived through the past 10, 20 years.
They're living through that crisis time, and hopefully they become strong people.
No, I'm talking about.
The end of it.
I'm talking about like I'm not even talking about that. I'm just like talking about like the fact that in the next few years, whatever may happen, they are going to be the new adults looking at this problem. You know what I mean?
But I agree with you. That's what I'm saying. Hopefully they become strong people because they're the ones living through this crisis. And what does the crisis create? Hard times create strong.
I think that it's going to be people in my generation potentially that like has to reconcile with that.
I think it'll be both, but I agree with you 100%.
I'm just meaning that like for me at least, whenever I still didn't have a whole lot of worries between the ages of 18 and 21. I felt like I did, but I really didn't, not compared to right now. So I'm talking about, let's say hypothetically, in the next like 3 or 4 years, something happens. I feel like there will probably still be some safety in place for them, but they're going to have to they're going to grow up pretty quickly in whatever this new change is. And that, I think, may mold them into potentially being, changing their perspective on some things. That's what I'm talking about. It's like, again, and just like putting into reference of this whole cycle we're talking about, all those things. I think it's interesting, and it's kind of cool.
You think about, just think of the young generation now. Are they willing to go to war?
No.
They're not.
No.
Look at...
They're not even willing to cut the grass.
They're
not willing to get out of their parents' or grandparents' basements.
There's right now, this idea of if we do, this what worries me about pushing these conflicts. Yeah. It's like, if we have to go to war with China, at some future date, are you willing... are you willing to strap on the M16 and go fight a war in Asia, which they've got over a billion soldiers over there to use? That's what I'm saying. So
this is the same group that said, let's rush Area 51. They can't kill all of us. Technically, yeah, they can. But their mentality on war and fighting and being strong is not there yet.
Well, then the question is okay, so that's where we're at right now, is what will bring down the old order?
Right.
Mm-hmm. What's going to bring down, and by necessity, people will have to rise up, and it's going to be a period of hard times. You're going to have to do without.
And think about that. No matter what this coming election brings, that's going to happen. No matter who wins. If Kamala Harris wins or Donald Trump wins, we're in that time frame, because also when you add now the prophecy of the popes, over the next 2 years.
I worry about 2028 more than right now, because I believe...
Well, 2027 is the prophecy of the popes, okay?
Right,
like what Ian said.
Yeah.
Okay, what's a couple of weeks or a couple of months on either side of it?
But then, like you're saying before, again, the 2028 is going to be the next presidential election, and at that point, it's like...
there is no Trump. Now it's a completely different ball game.
Yeah.
But will we get to that point?
Right.
Because of this election.
I think that we probably will, but again, it's like you were saying before, is like what is then going to happen between now and then that is then going to shift us into into the next 2028 election, have to sit here and go we're in a catastrophe now, and we have
and that's
to do
what I'm
out.
talking about. That's exactly.
Some people would say we're in that now.
We are in that now, and what's going to happen is the election is going to be the catalyst to push us into that change and social revolution, or civil war, or whatever that the crisis brings, because every crisis brings something.
I wouldn't be surprised if after this election, if the way I think it's going to go, that it doesn't spark in the next 4 years with the way the media has portrayed certain actors and certain people. I say actors, certain candidates, certain people.
Well, they are actors. They just working for the high dollar money people.
So what I'm saying is that I'm not saying I wish this upon any of us or that I have any sort of insider knowledge, but with the way that the previous elections has gone, and if things continue in the way they're going to go, I have heard people say more than ever during this election that it doesn't matter who gets in office, action is going to be made, apparently. And so that's what I'm saying.
That's what I just said. I 100% agree.
What I'm saying is that I wouldn't be surprised if after the next 4 years that we're singing a different tune in this country as to like you're saying before, Jason, about some decisions have to be made. This is your new way of life, and either conform or go somewhere else.
Yeah,
that's what I'm saying.
And that's what's that's
and I don't know which side of the coin that's going to be.
Exactly, that's the unknown. Is what side will emerge victorious?
Yeah, and I think there's going to be a spectrum. I think there's going to be a lot of people that are on the far side of whatever side that is. That's going to be okay with it. That's going to be singing its praises. There's going to be a large portion of people in the middle that are just going to keep their mouth shut and just live their lives. And then there's going to be that portion on the other side of those spectrums that are going to be like, I'm not doing this. we're gonna rebel, we're gonna do this, we're gonna get into prison, we're gonna like whatever it takes to not live this lifestyle. Or I'm gonna move out of the country. I mean, who knows? But
well, I mean, you hear people talk about that all the time.
oh, I know. But I'm talking about like,
But that's what I'm saying. So it'd be very interesting. But what will come out on the other end?
Yeah,
will reset the cycle, and then it will go through its own, seculum, wherever that might end. We won't be here, but whatever generations of people will live during that time, will endure. So I mean, I found it as a very interesting way of viewing human development.
Having this conversation specifically has gotten me curious about what does the world look like when I hit 50 in 20 years. You know what I mean? Like what?
It will be fundamentally different.
I know, and that's what I'm saying.
It will be.
But again, talking about this whole, this reestablishing of the. Let me. I closed it out. But like the restabilization, all that stuff is like what kind of catastrophe am I going to have to live through in my 30s and 40s to then like whenever I'm 50 go like, oh wow, we're on the other side of this. Conflict,
How will people be cared for? But I mean, how all that will work out. I mean, it's going to be, it'll be very interesting. But the book definitely, for being written in 1997.
Oh yeah,
really. I mean, they did a real good job of really capturing that. Yeah, this all just kind of goes in cycles, and it's kind of very predictable of how this happens. Yep. And
I think we can add this to our recommended book list. I'm going to say My Side of the Mountain, Chariots of the Gods, and The Fourth Turning. Definitely take the time. It's a 19-hour listen, though.
Yeah.
If you're going to listen to it through Audible or something like that, it's 19 hours, but it's worth it.
Yeah, the name of the book is called An American Prophecy, The Fourth Turning. What the Cycles of History Tells Us About America's New Rendezvous with Destiny. So by William Strauss and Neil Howe.
Yeah.
And there's plenty of YouTube videos out there with Neil going on there, a lot of different podcasts talking about this book. Yeah. And I think in today's time, I think it's
very relevant.
It's
relevant.
I'm sorry. Thank you. Relevant.
I think it definitely speaks to where we are right now as a society.
Yeah.
And I know we've really kind of focused on the American experience, but you can use this for other things too. Other parts of the world probably went through their own cycles.
Oh yeah.
So
I think this book, or at least the beginning portion, from what I like really remember, is very like America centric. But like you said before, I think a lot of this stuff kind of also can be applied to a global scale and how things shift and move and change and things like that. But yeah.
It was fun. It was fun. Reading it and learning about it, and I've been listening to a lot of podcasts on it now.
Once I changed my frame of reference as to when this book was written, I just assumed it was written in the past 15 or so years. But whenever I realized like, oh, this was in in the 90s, then once I changed my frame of reference. And I want to, for some reason, I want to say it's chapter 4 is what it feels like, starting that one, and then like having that new reference, and they're like, and then of course them talking about what's going to happen coming forward, and I don't want to say predicting the future, but like
in a way, again, predicting the future
within the ballpark of 3 years,
right?
Predicting something like that's going to happen. I was like, man, that's it. It kind of called me out a little bit. I was like, "Oh, yikes! That's a little too on the nose for me."
Very good,
but it's interesting. I really enjoyed it.
Very good.
So.
Well, I'm glad I came across this.
Yeah,
and I was able to share this with you all.
Of course.
And just gives us something else to think about.
This has been an episode in the making.
And I want to apologize. I know I messed up on some words, but I had 4 hours of cognitive testing and everything before I came to the studio today, so I'm kind of beat.
Yeah.
But I still wanted to come do this. But
of course.
Sorry about messing up some words, listeners. I appreciate y'all for being patient with me. I'll try to do better next time.
That's all good. I think the thing is, I think we understand what you're saying, and that's what all that matters, is that we know what you mean. For anybody out there who's wanting to let us know what you think about this book, or that you know if you have read it, or your opinions on this matter,
or if you're gonna read it, let us know.
If you're gonna read it, you can comment on like all the platforms. We have a Facebook page at Retrospect Pod. You can comment there. If you listen on Spotify, you can comment down in the little comment section. If you're on YouTube, little comment section, leave us a like. Subscribe on all the platforms you like us on. Again, you can type in Retrospect Pod on most major platforms and find us. And we also have an email address, getoffendedtogether@gmail.com, where you can give us some more long form responses if you wish. But until next time, thank you so much for listening. Bye-bye.
Goodbye, everyone. God bless.
Thanks for hanging out with us today. You're the best. Peace.